Thank you, everyone. To those who have just joined, we're going to wait another minute or two for our attendees to join the webinar, and then we'll be getting started with our Clinical Genomics Career Panel Series. Okay, in the interest of time, we can get started. So thank you all who have joined. Welcome to the 2024 ClinGen Clinical Genomics Career Panel Series. Today's session is dedicated to research, development, and other opportunities within clinical genomics, and we have 5 wonderful panelists to tell you about their paths today. My name is Danielle Azariti. I'm a genetic counselor and ClinGen program manager, and I'll be moderating today's panel. We have a few housekeeping items before we get started that I'll just run through. So as a reminder, all of the sessions that are part of this summer series will be recorded and the recordings made available. We've had 4 panels so far. All of those recordings are available on our YouTube channel, which you can get to by scanning the QR code you see here on the slide. Today's recording will be available sometime tomorrow, and then we have one additional panel coming up next week. That is stepping stone opportunities, roles that help individuals gain experience and knowledge before further education and jobs in the clinical genomic space. So if that's of interest, we hope that you join us or tune into that recording. Thank you to everyone who provided questions for our panelists. We do encourage you to ask more questions today as they come to mind during our introductions. You can use the Q&A box on the Zoom webinar feature. And if you see a question in the box that you would like to prioritize having our panelists respond to, you can vote for that question. So please feel free to either add questions or upvote them, and we will aim to get to all of the questions you'd like to hear the answers to. And before getting started and hearing all about our panelists, we'd like to first get started by learning about our attendees. You'll see a quick poll there in the Zoom window. So first, we'd like to know, as of September 2024, will you be a student? And we'll give everyone a moment to respond. Okay, it looks like the responses are slowing down, so moving around. So we have a number of undergrad students as of September 2024, PhD students, and then almost half attendees today are not currently a student or won't be in the fall. And the next question, how familiar are you with research and development career opportunities in the field of clinical genomics? Looks like we have a range on here among our attendees, not very familiar, slightly familiar, moderately familiar. So we'll just ask our panelists to keep that in mind as they educate you all about how they are using these opportunities in their own careers. Okay, hopefully I've shared those results with you. I may be using Zoom incorrectly. Okay. Okay, and with that, we can get to the good stuff. So the 5 individuals you see pictured here will be our panelists today, and will tell you about their experience working within the clinical genomics field and either opportunities that could be considered research, development, or other that we didn't have a good bucket for, but are certainly worth hearing about. So what I am going to do is introduce each of the individuals you see listed here. They're all on our panel today, and they will each start with about a 5-minute introduction, just telling you about the current role that they're in, and some of the training, education, and experiences that led them to this role. So with that, I will start with our first panelist. So that is Dr. Claudia Gonzaga Jorge. And Claudia, I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you for the invitation to be here and to all the attendees. My name is Claudia Gonzaga Jauregui. So I'm a genetics and genomics researcher. And so I'm originally from Mexico. I grew up in Mexico City, and I did my undergraduate studies in genomic sciences at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM. And after doing my genomics undergrad there, I was very interested from the beginning, since starting my undergraduate studies in human genetics. So at the time when I finished my undergrad, there wasn't a lot of opportunity to do human genetics and genomics in Mexico. So it was clear to me that I needed to go abroad to do a PhD. So I got into the Baylor College of Medicine graduate program in molecular and human genetics, which was a great experience there. And I can talk if people are interested about that later. So the application process and sort of the spots available for international students, it's a bit different for graduate programs in the US than it is for US citizens and residents. But I was very happy to be accepted at Baylor. I did my PhD training with Dr. James Lubsky there. It was also at the time we were just exploring the application of genomics, of whole genome sequencing and exome sequencing to study human diseases. So I was also part of the beginnings of the Centers for Mendelian Genomics, of which Baylor was one of them. And then after that, after I graduated from Baylor, I went on to do a postdoc at Duke. And then I was recruited as lead of Mendelian genetics into Regeneron Pharmaceuticals, who in 2014 opened the Regeneron Genetics Center. So they were looking for geneticists for that new large human genomic sequencing center. So I went into industry, which was something a bit unexpected. I wasn't really planning or I had thought of going into industry, but sort of life happened that way. So I was at Regeneron for 7 years. I was in the research and development part, but I also supported um, uh, several clinical development programs, sort of providing data from human genetics studies to support indications for several molecules that were in the pipeline for Regeneron or to start new clinical programs. And on the R&D part, so I was doing a lot of large-scale genomic analysis, some of them on families with rare genetic conditions, some others on large cohorts for rare diseases or not so rare, like pulmonary arterial hypertension or inflammatory bowel disease. And then also analysis on large biobanks like UK Biobank or the Geisinger My Code Health Initiative to look for variation in these large cohorts associated with disease. And then if there were some effects that were informative for clinical indications that Regeneron was pursuing or was interested in pursuing. And after my time at Regeneron, I decided to come back to Mexico. So in 2021, I came back to Mexico to start my research laboratory at UNAM, so my original university. And so I've been there for the last 3 years doing genomics of family-based studies on rare diseases in Latin America and in Mexico because there's a problem of access to genomic technologies in Latin America. So we are trying to basically do what we did 10 years ago with the Centers for Mendelian Genomics in the US, sort of provide that access for families with genetic disorders to genomic sequencing through research programs in Mexico. So I hope that was in the expected time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Excellent, wonderful. Thank you so much. So we'll introduce our other panelists, and then we've already got some questions lined up, which is wonderful. So next up, Dr. Richard Wintle, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Hi, yes, thanks. Hello, everyone. I am sitting in downtown Toronto right now. My current role is the Assistant Director of the Center for Applied Genomics, which is our large genome center here at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto. I've spent much of the last 18 years basically helping to build and run this place. I have a lot of experience in funding large-scale genomics infrastructures. I manage the bioinformatics team, who are right out in front of me here. I spend very small amounts of time in the lab with all the sequencers, which is right behind the wall behind me. And in my spare time, if you like, I'm very interested in the genetics and genomics of neuromuscular disorders, particularly cerebral palsy, which we're beginning to discover has a somewhat substantial genetic component to it. In the context of ClinGen, I serve as co-chair of one of the Gene Curation Expert Panels, or GCEPs, the cerebral palsy one, along with my very good friend and colleague, Claire Van Eyck, who is from Australia. So we have meetings either really early in the morning or late in the evening for us, and at really stupid times for people on the West Coast of the United States. So apologies to all of you guys. I'm very interested in the analysis of whole genome sequence data, which I think is probably going to be of some interest to the audience today. We run multiple sequencing technologies here and do a lot of obviously read mapping and variant calling and variant annotation and sort of scratching our heads and thinking about functional impacts of variants. My background is I really am not a clinician at all. I am a PhD molecular biologist. I specialized a little bit in human genetics here at the University of Toronto. I did a postdoc, switching gears a little bit, working on a little bit on the neurobiology and the nervous system of a little animal called C. elegans, which is a tiny little roundworm. Has a very simple nervous system with, I think, 959 neurons in it, if I'm remembering correctly. It was a long time ago. And then from there, I switched gears again. And like Claudia, I actually went into the private sector. So I spent about 6 years working in two related startup development stage companies, again, here in Toronto. Learned a lot of interesting things about startups, including why you might want to be in a startup company and also a lot of reasons why you might not want to be in a startup company. And then, as I mentioned, moved from there back to where I actually did my PhD, which was the Hospital for Sick Children. Been happily ensconced here ever since.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction. And next up, our third panelist, Dr. Karen Maishi.
Hello, so my name is Karen Maishi. I'm currently sitting in Cambridge in the UK. So it's the evening for me, and I'm working at AstraZeneca in a pharmaceutical company as an associate principal scientist. And I have been doing so for the past 3 years. Prior to that, I was working in the academia for 20 years. So I've done my big jump a bit late in life. And I've worked for more than 20 years on genomic data, not always human genomic data, but it was always lots of genomes, big data. And recently, I've integrated electronic health record to my work. So we build cohort of patients with specific diagnosis, and we try to look at the genetics that's behind it. So my background is in genetic, developmental genetic, and immunology. And when I did my studies, the human genome wasn't even sequenced. It was just an idea that just started. Bioinformatics was just at the beginning, at its infancy. So I did a PhD in bioinformatics in the end at the University of Lumini in France. I picked that university because I knew I wanted to do genetic and immunology, and it was a top one that wasn't too far away from where I lived. By chance, I did a bit of programming, and I was right. I do like programming, so can I combine genetic and immunology? Yeah, I can. It's called bioinformatics. Fantastic. Let's do that. And I had one turning point where I went and did a summer placement at the European Bioinformatics Institute, just to get some experience. And that's where I discovered what bioinformatics was, and I was right. This is what I want to do. So that was one big turning point. So as soon as I had my PhD, I moved for a postdoc at the university in Cambridge because I really liked the place. After a couple of years, I joined the European Bioinformatics Institute to work on the genome of mosquitoes and carrier of other human pathogens. So starting really in the genomic, but linked to human disease, because I wanted to work around human disease. You can only stay for 9 years at the EBI. So after 9 years, I moved back to the University of Cambridge. And there I joined a project that would then lead to the Genomics England project, where we had the sequence of 10,000 patients with rare disorder. And my job was to lead the identification of the genetic of the gene of causing the disorder. And that was the second thing where I was right. I just love that. I started to link with ClinGen, with all the ACMG guideline, with all that clinical reporting of the variant, learning that there is a patient behind. So learning all the clinical work behind it. And that's what I really, really loved. When the project finished, because it's academia and you've got a grant and at some point it all finishes, I had to make a big choice. And the choice was either I continue in that domain in variant interpretation, but then I would have to train properly and to become a consultant. So go back to school, go back at the bottom of the ladder, train again, or move to a company. So not a company, move to specifically AstraZeneca, because I knew some people who had been there who loved it. It was quite hard because I really liked the variant interpretation, but going back down at the bottom of the ladder I just didn't really want to do that. So that's when I did the big jump to join a pharma company. They had lots of data and they had electronic health record, which I was really interested in. So that's where I've been since then. I'm still linking with ClinGen. I'm still working with my old department of hematology. And the group I'm in is for creating gene in rare bleeding disorder.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction. And next up, Dr. Dustin Baldridge.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here and very much enjoying this conversation and getting to know the other panelists. So I'm Dustin Baldridge. I'm here in currently gloomy St. Louis, Missouri. It's raining, pouring cats and dogs outside. I'm an assistant professor here in the Department of Pediatrics, and I run a relatively new research lab for the last couple of years or so. So my training path, I would say, began during undergrad with the usual courses and so forth, but specifically in the summers, I had some excellent summer undergraduate research experiences. And that really gave me a taste of what was to come and showed me the field of human genetics, which I became very, very interested in and still am today. I then finished my undergraduate degree and moved to Houston, Texas. So Claudia and I actually trained at the same graduate program, Molecular and Human Genetics, at Baylor. And I really enjoyed my time there. I did a PhD in skeletal biology, looking at some rare disorders using mice to model the human disorder, and also some cell work. And it was just really fantastic training and a really great experience. I finished my MD PhD training and then moved here to St. Louis in 2011. So it's been a little while. I came here for pediatrics residency training, and I finished that around 2014, 2015. So I then made a difficult decision to leave clinical care behind, actually, and to move full-time back into the research side. It just continued to have this pull on me, and so I finally gave in and pursued a postdoc studying the genetics of autism, as well as using genome sequencing to study children that are in the NICU with suspected genetic disease. So some really fascinating, interesting projects then as well. And then now in my own lab, we do functional genomics. So we try to take the data that comes from whole genome sequencing and the variants that are identified in order to measure them in our laboratory. And specifically, we do technology development to try to measure hundreds or thousands of variants in a single experiment. So I really enjoy that work as well. I just feel like I've been very privileged along the way, and I really enjoy doing the work that I do, and specifically with the team that I work with as well. As others mentioned, I also have some side projects that I've acquired over time. I help out with the Undiagnosed Diseases Network, doing some bioinformatic analysis for that project. I work with something called the Brain Gene Registry, which is a collection of electronic health record data and genetic data as well. Something else called the Genomic Information Commons, which is another one of these efforts, multi-institutional, to kind of pull the data together. And that's another thing that I really just enjoy about academia, is working with these large teams, team science, making an impact, and really trying to improve the health and lives of patients that have these rare genetic disorders. So again, thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much. And our final introduction, Dr. Lisa Brown.
Hi, everyone. I am here from North Carolina. Recently moved down here from New York City after 15 years there, so I'm kind of a recovering New Yorker. But I earned my PhD with Arturo Casadevall at Albert Einstein in the Bronx, actually studying microbiology, infectious disease. Also did my undergrad in biology and studied basically turkey whooping cough. So a lot of bacterial genetics. I actually kind of made the decision in grad school not to study human disease because it seemed really hard and human genetics seemed really hard, whereas bacteria do not have more than one chromosome. So basically, if you want to call it that. So, but after I finished my PhD, I somehow finagled my way into going into industry, turning down a postdoc and going into industry to do medical affairs, so to be a medical science liaison for a pharmacogenetics company in psychiatry. So that was AssureX Health at the time. It was then bought by Myriad Genetics. And then so I was there for 5 years. Then in medical affairs, did a lot of publishing, a lot of business development, networking, clinical development, designing clinical trials, a lot of education, doing a lot of consults with clinicians. So as I'm not a clinician myself, also not a pharmacist, I kind of have a scientific view of things, but did a lot of education on that end. Then I went to Tempest Labs to build their medical affairs department for their pharmacogenetics test within psychiatry. Um, and did that for a few years. And decided I kind of wanted to learn a little bit more about the pharma side of medical affairs and clinical development. So continued to do consulting on the side in psychiatric pharmacogenomics. So member of a few societies like CPIC, PGRN, ISPG. And even though my full-time job was no longer in genetics, I was doing a lot of consulting, still publishing, helping out different kind of labs become bigger companies, talk about education in a very controversial field, and kind of just doing that on the side. So I really enjoyed being on the industry side of things and learning about the different pathways, the business side, the marketing side, the education side, the patient experience, especially not being a clinician. So thinking a lot about what that patient need is and what the patient experience is. And I've been able to do that within medical affairs, basically being the science liaison between the company and providers, and clinicians and researchers. So I'm not on the sales team. I don't sell anything, but I get to talk about science all day and talk about the company and learn kind of what things are needed and then do a lot of education. And also a lot of economics work, which has been really interesting because unfortunately in our society, things don't happen unless someone's paying for it. So we have to think a lot about how do we save money in healthcare? How can we create these interventions? So that's been a really important part of my work that I think doesn't get talked about a lot in these kind of panels. So I wanted to at least mention it that that's an option too if you're kind of interested in the economics of things. That is a big space in clinical genomics. Yeah, so that's kind of me.
Well, thank you all so much for those introductions. We do have a question to start us off from an attendee, so I'll just set that question up. So this attendee is an undergrad pursuing a degree in biochemistry and molecular biology, specifically at a foreign university. And their question is about how to find internships or other summer experiences, research programs that are taking on undergrad students. Specifically for this question, but I think you could answer for both, available to students from foreign universities. So I know probably across our panelists, we have a number of attendees who have either participated in such programs or maybe offered them at their institution. So if anyone wants to take that question up first, I can turn things over to you.
Could maybe jump in if you like.
Sure.
So I'm sitting in an enormous children's hospital, which is affiliated with the University of Toronto. So generally, summer students in this institution come in through a formal summer student program. It's called SURE, SSURE. I don't remember exactly what that stands for, but something to do with summer research experience or something. And it's got sort of a defined way of applying. You just go on the hospital's website. If you hunt around, you'll find it probably pretty easily. And it all goes through sort of a central application process. I think I, like many other people, tend to get bombarded with a lot of emails from people who want to do either summer studentships or internships or some kind of volunteer position or that kind of stuff. We don't really have the bandwidth to look through all of those individually. So we go through this sort of formalized summer student program for the most part. We do also take a lot of students through formal cooperative education programs from a couple of local universities that run those kind of undergraduate programs, but that's a little bit different than what the question was.
I can add, as having been a foreign student as well, so most of the programs in the US are generally funded by NIH, which puts some restrictions on accepting international students. So most of them will be for citizens and residents. There are a few that do accept international. So I'm aware of the undergraduate research program at Cold Spring Harbor, which is one of those, but there are also few. However, I do encourage this attendee and also other undergrads from other countries that would be interested to look in other places. So I, as an undergrad, participated in the Weizmann Institute summer research program, which is for international students. So that's a great option as well. And then I don't know exactly about Canada, if they have opportunities for international students, but you do need to sort of be aware of kind of sometimes those restrictions in terms of where the funding is coming from for those programs. But there are several opportunities, just look broadly. That would be my recommendation.
I can't speak to the international side of things, but in general, summer research, side research, that sort of thing from undergrad up. Honestly, networking is a really, really big piece. I'm very privileged and lucky that I kind of learned this young, whereas when I was going into college, I had a family friend say, well, why don't you just email the head of biology at your upcoming undergrad and ask them about research? I had no idea what I was doing. Turned out she was wonderful. I ended up working for her, even getting paid all through undergrad as well as over the summers as a research person. She helped me get through her networking, helped me, I think, with getting into grad school as well as another internship between undergrad and grad school. So any kind of outreach or networking that you have, even if you find someone, let's say nearby at an institution near where you live and you're going to be for the summer, you might not be paid, but if you have the time and you don't have to be paid, email that person from their website and you think is interesting and say, hey, can I at least come and learn? It wouldn't be official means, like applying and that sort of thing. But sometimes that might be an opportunity. You just never know. The worst thing that happens is they say no or they don't answer you. And you never know what might happen. So highly recommend, can be time consuming to kind of send those emails and those messages, but again, you never know where you'll end up. I had no idea I'd be where I am today, but I do say that most of it is due to networking and just trying to kind of cold call people and hope that someone's willing to take a chance on me.
I fully agree with Lisa. That's how I've been going, networking and applying spontaneously. One of my internship in one summer was asking one of the teachers at the university where I was to say, do you have a placement for me? It was a very good experience because it made me realize I do not want to work in a lab. So that was the one summer where I realized I don't want to do that. And then when I had the position at the EBI, I also spontaneously applied, looked what I was interested in, found the group, and then just emailed them basically.
Yeah, I agree with all those that's been said. This is really great advice. And I just can't emphasize enough the importance of taking advantage of these summer opportunities if possible. I just think that's a great pathway to success, trying things out, like it's been said. Just know that a lot of these applications are due way before the summer, though, right? So like December, January, before the following summer. So you can't start too early. Like now is an okay time to start looking for these programs or sometime in the fall. I also agree with like following the breadcrumbs of networking. So, finding someone who's done something similar and ask them how they figured it out. And then, well, ask them if they know anybody else who's done something similar and just kind of keep going down the line of people who might be able to give you advice. Yeah, I just think these are great. I'm also going to ask that the link be shared here, which is a nice collection that we have locally of programs that people might consider. I'll put that in the chat for the organizers. So yeah, please take advantage of your summers if you can at all.
Also, some industry, some companies have either like co-op or internship type programs. I mean, all of
Yes.
this can be pretty brutal and competitive to get into, but there are definitely options, especially if any of these places are local to where you'll be.
Thank you all for that very thorough answer. We do have another question that I'll tee up next. For those of you that transitioned out of academia to industry, how did you make yourself marketable to industry for an industry clinical genetics role? And a follow-up question, if you did a postdoc, how did it help you gain transferable skills for working in clinical genetics? So feel free to take a part or the whole question or wait for the next question if you think you have an answer then. Yes.
So I can give you one answer to the industry question, which is not going to be the same answer that Carrie and others might give. I went to work for a startup company, and when you work for a startup company, the criteria for hiring are you breathing and are you willing to work? And that's pretty much it. Okay. If you apply for a job like a staff scientist job, say at AstraZeneca or a big pharma or a medium to big pharma or biotech company, typically those job postings tend to be very focused. We're looking for someone with 3 to 5 years of postdoctoral experience who understands electrophysiology and can do second messenger assays for G protein coupled receptors in cell culture. That's what we want. Startup company, can you pipette? Do you have a brain? Do you know how Microsoft Word works? That's pretty much it. So, there are pluses and minuses to both approaches. But if you're really just looking to get in the door, start beating on doors and maybe consider working in a startup company for a short while.
That's a very good that's a very good
Go
comparison.
ahead.
So for AstraZeneca, I only joined recently, so I had quite a big background behind me. And I joined a research team where I knew people. So I knew where I was going and they could recommend me. I think what helped, apart from my experience in leading project and publication, is a network I was coming in because I've been involved in lots of things, lots of big international projects. I was involved in things kind of on the side, like ClinVar and ClinGen. And basically you're coming with a network. It's not just you, it's everybody else you know and all the contact you've got. And I think that did help a lot.
Yeah, I'll just add to what Richard and Karen just said that so for the second question, there was nothing from my postdoc that was transferable. For the first question, um, I agree with what they said. So I think the networking is important. So when I moved into industry, it was because someone that I had worked with at Baylor had already been there. So, and since they were building the team at the very beginning of the Return Genetic Center, so you rely a lot on the people you know and that network. So that's one. But I also hired people while I was there. So then to Richard's point, it's true that when you put out a job post for a specific role, it's very tailored to what the current needs of the group are. So in that sense, definitely looking at the characteristics of what the job post is requesting for the applicant. So if you have experience in single cell sequencing, but they are looking for someone to work on bioinformatics of other things, so maybe that's not a great fit. And also one thing that I looked for in applications was it's generally, at least in my opinion, good practice to have a letter of intent. Like, why do you want to join the company? Like, what's your fit with the role? What do you know about the company? And I think that's not only true for positions in industry, but also for a postdoc or other positions in academia. I think doing that previous homework of how you fit within the research group or the group in industry, what do you know of what they are doing already and what's interesting, and how you can contribute, that part is important and tells you that the applicant at least did some prior work of trying to find out how they can contribute to the work that you're doing.
And I think out if you're in the medical affairs space, clinical development, kind of outside of the wet lab or computer lab, there's really three things: networking, which already been discussed. So the network that you bring with you, as well as the network that you utilize to get the position, or if you know the field well, whether that be competition, as well as the company that you're looking into. I think from your academic experience, being able to demonstrate leadership experience. So were you part of your graduate senate or things like that, and any projects that you kind of accomplished outside of your lab work, as well as education, were you a TA, that sort of thing. And then something that I actually think got me this job at AssureX, not having any experience at the time, is also demonstrating what you've learned outside of your work. So coming from the lab space into a space where I had to be a kind of external facing ENTJ rather than an INTJ is very different when we're used to kind of working in this lab with our close teams. And it was not something I ever expected to do, but I realized that in my personal life where I was very involved in the music scene. So booking bands, selling merch, interacting with people, that sort of thing. And then also, interestingly, in the tattoo scene. So working at conventions with artists, not an artist myself, I can't even draw a stick figure, but kind of interacting with clients and kind of this external, almost like a retail experience, kind of gave me this edge of this different type of interaction that I could bring to this experience that would potentially differentiate myself from other people that maybe just came from the lab and strictly had this academic experience. And so something to kind of keep in mind, to really just leverage your other experience and think about how you can market it or turn it into something valuable of what the job is you're looking at, as well as to just make you interesting. Because as someone who hired people, like I want to hire people that I like and that are cool and I think I can work with. So if you can't really bring your personality to some of those interviews, then it's hard to remember you. So just think about those little things that you can kind of bring beyond your expertise, because they wouldn't have started the interview with you if you didn't have the expertise on paper. So you have to make yourself memorable.
Yeah, so I didn't make the jump to industry yet, but but I wanted to say that a couple things just to accentuate things that have already been said. One is about these personalized communications that Claudia was mentioning. I just can't say that enough. These broad emails that are very generic, I personally don't respond to, and I think most people don't. So I really encourage you to specify why you're emailing that person and what it is you hope to gain out of that relationship. The other point is, I think it's important. This is the advice for general success. I think it's important to identify somebody who has the job that you think you want and try to connect with them and ask them questions about their job and verify whether that is a good match for what you want. And then tell them, I think you have the job that I want. How did you get there? And ask them for advice about what the next steps should be for you. So try to get personalized mentoring. I've been really beneficial personally with that, to have great mentors in my career. And I just think that's a really important key to success, is to try to reach out and identify people who can help you get to where you want to go.
Great. Thank you so much. So much there for all of our attendees. We have another question that's sprinkled with just some asking for really excellent advice. So I'm going to read the whole question, and then there may be certain parts that our panelists want to pick up on. How was your first time experience pursuing your career in research? Was there a particular event, step, or anything that improved your career? Looking back, what key advice would you give students who are willing to journey down this path? So if any of that resonates with you, feel free to chime in.
Oh gosh, can I start?
Sure.
I'll just take the last little piece. Pearls of wisdom as best I can. I have been exceptionally fortunate, I would say, in my career with the mentors that I've had, the people I've worked with. And that starts with my first summer job. And that, speaking of networking, that led essentially to my PhD supervisor, a fantastic scientist named Diane Cox, who, for the Human Genome Project, folks in the room, was at one point the co-chair of the Chromosome 14 committee. And so on to my current boss, Steve Scherer, whose name may be familiar to you, Dustin, since you worked on autism spectrum disorder. But in each case, I think the common thread has been I've been lucky to find great people, but I've sought out success. My postdoc supervisor, same thing, was quite a young rising star, The guy I work for now, Steve Shearer, is an absolute superstar, very productive lab, very wonderful group here, which we could talk about as a separate topic. But that would be my one suggestion or piece of advice is there are lots of great scientists around, but if you want to really move ahead in your career, try and find the productive ones who are really, really making an impact. And that may not be necessarily the people that you immediately first think of.
I'll try to go next if that's okay. So I think one key response to that question is to think about one's passion. I know this is very generic advice and everyone likes to talk about find your passion, but it's been really true in my career that, sometimes things are hard. I remember some dark times in graduate school when nothing was working. And then even now as a new PI, it's hard when grants and papers are rejected and things. So it's a long road usually to get to one of these positions that people on this panel have. And I think it's important to have that internal passion to say, yes, this is something that I really want. And that can take a while to identify. And if it's not something that you're passionate about, then it's okay. It's okay to move on to find something else that you are passionate about. So just, have something that keeps you intellectually curious and motivated and internally driven and follow that passion. The other point I wanted to make was related to the comments about networking and such. I think going to a national meeting early in one's career might be a good idea to get a sense of what's out there. So one of my favorite meetings is the American Society for Human Genetics. It's pretty big and has a diverse set of human genetics research that's being presented. And that's a fantastic opportunity for networking, especially if you can attend with someone else who can kind of help introduce you to other people and things like that. So just something to consider. That was something that was very formative for my early research experiences.
Can I jump on that? I'm not going to repeat what has been said about the passion, especially. It creates your opportunities. So sometimes I feel I've been very lucky in finding my new jobs just because I talk to people about the topic I'm interested in, and I just find like the job I like that's just landed to me. But it's because I've created opportunity. I go and talk to people, and if I'm interested in a topic, I will go and see the person at the EBI was working on that topic to say, hey, I would like to move team. Do you have a job for me? Or maybe not now, but maybe they've got it in 3 months' time. Going to meeting, maybe the big ones, maybe the small ones. So when I started, I did all the PhD one, and then I did the postdoc one, and I got involved with the postdoc society just to meet people, basically. And don't be afraid to tell them, this is what I would like to do. I really like what you're doing. Can I join your team? And if you create your opportunities, it will, open doors. Don't be afraid to go and talk.
Yeah, you really have to put yourself out there, which can sometimes be hard. But once you start to do it, I think you kind of get the hang of it and learn the best ways to kind of manage that time because it can be time consuming. And always kind of ask for opportunities. Go be the one to volunteer for things, even if it's things you don't want to do. I still publish a lot on the side. You don't have to have a mentor to give you something to write. You can actually just write something if you want to. Find collaborators or people that you have always wanted to write with and do something like that. You can always do a systematic analysis if you want to. But just really kind of come up with these different things that and take charge on things because you never, again, the worst thing that can happen is someone says no, but the best thing that can happen is that you end up somewhere great.
Yeah, I would just add to what my co-panelists have said and maybe bring it full circle back to the first thing Richard mentioned, which was mentoring. So I have been fortunate in having great mentors, but also unfortunate in having bad mentorship as well. So, and to me, that's really one of the key things. And I talked about this with students often, like finding good mentors. Sometimes it's not the biggest name in the field or the lab that has the most funding sometimes, and also depends on each person's style and their needs. So sometimes maybe PIs that are just starting that have more time to mentor students closely might be a better fit for some students. So really try to find people that will support you and that will advocate for you, because that will be important for the rest of your career. not just for the time that you are in the lab, but like you will need like letters of recommendation, like future support. So finding those mentors is really important. And then to the first question of these two-part question about like what was an early experience. For me, when I was in high school, I got involved with science biology Olympiads in Mexico. And that for me was a really nice experience because I that was kind of where that light switch of like, oh, this might be a good career for me, a career in science, because that was something that I really enjoyed. I was good at. I went to the national competition, so it was like maybe this is something that I can pursue professionally. So I also think that encouraging students early on when they are in high school and just figuring out what they want to do later in life, it's important in these type of science fairs and science competitions and that, because that might be something that can completely change their lives.
Excellent. Thank you all for those answers. An important question also came up, regardless of the role that you have. How is your work-life balance? Or yes, no. Do you have work-life balance? And then how is it?
It's very difficult. In my case, I found it very difficult, and I'm passionate about what I do. So I tend to maybe work too much. However, I also have a family. I've got 3 kids, and I want to spend time with them. And as somebody said, you've got 8 in summer with your children. So it's difficult. Overall, I think it's balanced, but there are times when you spend lots of time more on the science, more on the work, because you've got a paper coming out or whatever, and other time where you say, right, this is summer now. I'm leaving work at 6 o'clock because I want to spend time with my kids. It's a hard one, and I still haven't figured it out.
Mine is actually not bad right now, but my kids are adults, so they don't require very much care and feeding, although they both still live at home, but that's another story. But I'm quite fortunate in that although we are kind of a structured genome center, it's still pretty much an academic environment. So nobody's punching the clock, whether I'm working 7 till 3, 8 to 4, 9 to 5. We're a little flexible on the hours, and I've been here long enough, and I think I hope proven my value enough to the organization that nobody's going to be too upset with me if I need to sneak out for an appointment in the afternoon or take half day off here or there. So for me, it's a little bit different, but it did take a while to get there. And that kind of specter that Karen mentioned of like always wanting to work harder because the work is so interesting is, it probably catches up to all of us, I would guess.
I think industry, depending on your role, sometimes it can be a 9 to 5-ish role. You might go to conferences or have to do some travel or something like that. We'll say in medical affairs, it has the flexibility of where you kind of make your own schedule to an extent, but then you're also overscheduled. So I will say my first 5 years, kind of making my way, I did not have a work-life balance at all. Basically didn't have a life. But that was also my own doing. I had plenty of colleagues that did have a better work-life balance. So I, again, was privileged that I had the kind of opportunity of not having kids at home to take care of other than a dog. I have to be very cognizant of that. But I think you kind of, if I did it differently going back, I would have made a little bit more time for that work-life balance starting out, kind of set the stage because it took me too long to figure it out.
Yeah, I would add to that that yes, I think sort of you yourself trying to carve out that time is it's important because I mean similarly when I was in industry I was single and I didn't have kids or anything, so I cannot say I have a great work-life balance because I was working all the time. But now and that was in some way also part of the many factors that were part of the decision to move back into academia. Now I have a 4-year-old, and yes, sometimes like you have more time to dedicate to the lab and grant writing or whatever, but you also have to make time for the family and that. So I think that making yourself, carving that space for you, for your family is important, regardless of the environment you're at. And the other part that I think it's really important for that is having supportive partners. So I think maybe more so for women, but definitely for both men and women, having a partner that understands and sort of balances sometimes these needs for extra time in the lab or extra time for writing. It's really important because I personally would struggle a lot if I didn't have a supportive partner. And environment, also the environment you are.
I love this question, and I love hearing everyone's perspective on this. Claudia, I remember you and I talking about this actually at the American Society for Human Genetics meeting as you were transitioning from industry into academia. So it's great to hear how things are going now. So yes, I have a 7-year-old and 2-year-old at home, so they keep us busy. And my wife is also in academia. She runs a research lab. I like to say that I married well. She's smarter and more successful than I am in all ways, so that's great. And so everything that's been said is very true. I think how I would answer this question would depend on what stage of my career I'm in. If I was in clinical residency, I would say, what are you talking about? I was literally working 100-hour weeks, timed on the clock. So there is no work-life balance in that situation. Now things are pretty great, actually. I set strong boundaries, which is not something that has been my strong suit, but when kids entered the equation, that was really important. And yeah, so academia for me seems to be very flexible and open. Now that I'm hiring people, I care more about whether people are internally driven and want to work hard when they're at work, and less about whether they want to take a 2-week vacation ahead of, and with plenty of notice, and those sorts of things. Like I think it's not about the hours in the week that are worked, the number of hours. It's about the intensity and efficiency and internal motivation and ability to be somewhat independent in the way that they work. So I hope that we're in a society where we can carve out our work-life balance as we wish. That's probably naive, but and I think people who are earlier in their careers may have less flexibility in that way. So I'm trying to, I consider myself mid-career, so I'm trying to enjoy this flexibility now that I have it.
Thank you all. We've had a wonderful just participation from the attendees, adding questions and just such great responses. I think we're down to time for one more question that I'll have anyone who would like to weigh in on. From one of our attendees and upvoted by others, for those of us who are still in undergrad or still considering the different advanced degrees, do you feel a PhD or MD is strongly encouraged or required to have a career in research? Are there advantages or limitations to pursuing a career in research at the master level?
Can I go first this time? Is that okay?
Sure.
I've been considering hiring master's level people versus postdocs in my own lab, and so I've been thinking through this equation quite a bit. I think either are fine. I don't think that there's a hard and fast rule. I will say that graduate school probably opens up other opportunities that maybe a master's level training doesn't. I think it also gives you a very special privileged time of 3 to 5 to 8 years to really focus on a topic and become a world expert in that area that a master's level might not. Both are great. I would say if there's any lack of clarity on this decision, there's no need to rush into either one. And I would recommend taking a year or two to do some other position and talk to a lot of people who are getting masters and PhDs and see which one fits you better. So that's my answer.
Yeah, I sometimes have gotten that question from students and also from applicants in industry. So I mean I agree with Dustin that it is I mean it is not necessary to have a PhD depending on what you want to do. So I do tell trainees think about it, right? Think what you want to do, where do you see yourself later on, and what you want for your career. So, and it's not generalizable, and maybe people will disagree. But one thing that I do tell students is if you think that at any point you want to be a PI, then definitely go for a PhD because you'll need that. But if you want to be in research and you're still uncertain, so I think getting a master's in something that it's marketable, that it's applicable, like bioinformatics, like computer science or other like statistics right now. So something that it's applicable, it's really useful. And then if you are interested in industry, you can get into an industry position with a master's and kind of gauge if you like that, if you like the environment, if you like the work there. If you like being an individual contributor, but maybe don't want the whole responsibility of running a lab and having people and writing grants and that, maybe, yeah, like going through a PhD, a postdoc, and all of that extra training might not be worth it. I know people that started at Regeneron with a master's degree that are now like associate directors for so and so. So they have really made career in industry. So again, I think it very much depends on what your interests are and what you want to do with your career.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of those sentiments too. Here in this Genome Center environment, the folks who work in the actual labs behind me, very few of them have PhDs. Some of them do, but not very many. There are quite a few master's degrees there, but there are also people who have community college diplomas or degrees. So, research laboratory technologist type certification. The group in front of me, the bioinformatics group, is probably about half of them have PhDs. But they're a really mixed bag. And I think, that's a field where if you have an undergraduate degree in computer science, you can become a bioinformatician. You need to learn a bit of biology, but that's okay. There are undergraduate programs in pure bioinformatics now, which wasn't a thing sort of 10 or 12 years ago, really. And then the last thing I would say is that probably the most effective and successful person I know in this environment is the manager of the Genome Center, who sits in that office right there. She was the initial manager in 1998 when it was her and two technicians. We now have over 100 people. She has a bachelor's degree. So, the PhD, although I like to flaunt it from time to time, is not the be all and end all for any of these disciplines.
I'll echo that in AZ, some of the top people, vice presidents, high position, don't have a PhD. But, they've gone up, they've gone through the year, they've done a good job. They
Yeah,
are
a very
fine.
good friend of mine is like that. He never finished his PhD and is now the chief operating officer of an enormous biotech company in California.
If you want to work in academia at the University of Cambridge for a certain level, for you to go up, they require to have a PhD. The other thing I've learned, and I don't know how it is in the US, but in England, you don't have to do a PhD right after your master. You don't have to do everything one after the other one. You can just have a master, go and work, come back 5 years later and say, right, I would like to do a PhD now. And then you just do it later. But what I have found coming from France is that everybody knows everywhere in the world what a PhD is. So one of the top things in France is to do those engineers school, and it's all, golden if you do that in France. But when you move to England, nobody knows what it is. However, everybody knows what a PhD is. So that's an interesting thing. If you're planning on moving around, going abroad, then a PhD is, everybody knows what it means.
Thank you all so much for those thoughtful responses. We are already at the end of our time. I want to thank our panelists and attendees so much. I'm just going to bring up one more or two more, perhaps, slides just to end our panel here. So bear with me. The recording of today's excellent discussion will be posted on the ClinGen website and YouTube channel. You can follow, just click on that box on our website or follow us on X or LinkedIn to see when that's posted. And for all of our attendees, we will be sending you a post-series survey. We hope to get feedback from you to help us plan future events. This is our third year hosting this summer series. We've been trying to build off all the feedback we've received over the years. So with that, I'd just like to again thank our panelists for their time and all the attendees. Thank you for your questions and for participating.